America's #1 pizza company, Dog Nation, and Marcos, thanks you for being here with us tonight. As you know, Marcos is pizza MVP. MVP dough, made fresh every day, an original sauce, signature cheeses on every pizza. Get 2 medium, 2-topping pizzas right now. The everyday value of just $6.99 a piece. Order today from Marcos.com. It's a great idea, just like Dog Nation is a great idea, and Power's Take on Facebook Live is a great idea. I'm glad to be here with you. Glad to be anywhere, as Rodney Dangerfield would say, but I'm particularly glad to be here at this point in time. It's football season, really. It is. It's the games don't start for another month. Georgia obviously opens against Austin Peay on September 1st at Sanford Stadium. But tomorrow, the Bulldogs are on the field. As a matter of fact, I imagine the Bulldogs are on the field today. They're probably on the field at, unfortunately, because of the weather, it has not stopped raining, I don't think, from the month of July into August for sure. Some unbelievable weather here in Georgia last night, but fortunately for Georgia, I should say, they have the Payne Center, the indoor athletic facility named after Billy Payne and his father. And I'd imagine they're going through some walkthrough and doing the things they have to do to get ready for the first practice of the year, which will happen around 3 to 3:30 tomorrow afternoon. We're going to get a chance to talk to Kirby Smart and the players before that with the, I guess you call it UGA Media Day. They don't really have a name for it, but that's what we call it. Always have a little briefing of the media before the actual practices start, and I would imagine we'll get some updates from Kirby. Not a whole lot. It hasn't been that long since we saw him, obviously, at SEC Football Media Days when we were able to determine a few things, such as Demetrius Robertson is, in fact, on campus. When he'll be eligible to play remains a question that we hope to get answered at some point. I don't know that we'll find out tomorrow necessarily, but we still want to know when Matrez Patrick will be available to play. Obviously, he's still on the team. D'Angelo Gibbs is back on the team. When and if will he be able to play? So that's certainly one of the things we want to look at. But the main agenda, is just what's Georgia going to look like in 2018. And based on everything we hear, y'all be sure and offer your questions on Facebook Live. Let me get those up now so we can start thinking about answering those. Let's see here. How many of you are on here? Oh, that's awesome. A lot of folks. Good to see you. Tony Porter, Amy Lowe, Ro Hawkins just ships into the house. Man, into Hizzle, whatever you want to call it. Tommy Douglas says, good to see you. Tom Center wants to know, any insight on what Urban Meyer News will have on recruiting? Yeah, here's some insight. It'll be negative. It'll have a negative effect on recruiting. There's no question about that. Georgia is involved with some players, already committed to Ohio State, and some that are being recruited by Ohio State. But that's a terrible, unfortunate situation. I'm tempted to say karma, because there's been a lot of stuff that's happened with players under Urban Meyer's watch going back to his Florida days that makes you wonder how much he's concerned about anything off the field with his players or his coaches, for that matter. And that was unfortunate to read. Good work by Brett McMurphy and the stadium. I guess is a new outfit. A lot of new outfits out there. But us old outfits, we're still here. Chuck Pearson wants to know, like everybody wants to know, you got anything on D-Rock? I have nothing new today at this moment. It'll be addressed by Kirby Smart tomorrow. Hello, Chad Buchanan from Jacksonville. Jose Serrano says it sounds better. Looks good. If Fred Pittman wants to know where my umbrella is, fortunately it's not raining in here in my office, but I'm telling you, it's keeps coming down like it is. It's liable to spring a leak. But Georgia picked number 4 by the coaches. I don't know where this falls on you. I'd love to hear your comments on Facebook as to what you care. I mean, here's the reality of it. Number 4 is the highest ranking that Georgia has had in the preseason since 2008. You may recall that in 2008, Georgia was picked number 1, and it actually didn't last very long. If I'm not mistaken, they lost the number 1 ranking right after the first game, and it wasn't because they lost. They just didn't look particularly great in winning, and they, somebody else, I can't remember who won the season at number 1. I'll have to go back and check that for you. In 2008, they were number 1. Georgia Southern was who they opened with. If you remember, they won 45-21, but they struggled for a minute with them, and they actually dropped for a couple of weeks until they met Alabama, and they lost big in that one, and they lost the number 1 ranking for the rest of the year. So number 4 in the coaches poll. Here's what that means. It means nothing right now. Obviously, everybody knows that, but it's a great place to start from. And, these preseason polls and everything else, even though everything is considered by the selection committee nowadays in terms of the playoff and what happens at the end of the year, polls are taken into account. And if you start number 4 in a poll, the reality is you can lose and get back there. It's harder for somebody who starts 12 or 15 in the poll to lose a game early and then get back into the mix. But if you started at the top, you generally can get back there. And, they call it the coaches poll, and that's fine, the USA Today coaches poll, I think it is. They probably should call it the sports information directors poll, because it's been my experience the majority of this. Most of the coaches aren't sitting down and filling out the ballot. But Mark Richt used to claim he filled his out all the time, and himself. Adam Hicks says he's super excited about Brenton Cox. Hasn't heard much about him. And it's a good point. I haven't heard a lot about Brenton Cox either. I've seen him out there. Our access to, 60 minutes of football has been very limited. We get 60 minutes of football over the course of about a week. With the limitations that Kirby Smart puts on our access, make of that what you will. But Brenton Cox, obviously a great player. He happens to play outside linebacker. Georgia has a lot of great players, and I don't think there's any question going into camp that Brenton Cox is not with the first team. Obviously, that is Walter Grant and DeAndre Walker. They're going to be your outside linebackers to start with. But big Mr. Cox, Georgia has recruited very, very well at the outside linebacker position, and that's not one of great concern for me with regard to the Dogs heading into this season, because of guys like Mr. Cox and Adam Anderson and all those guys that they've recruited for the position. But, chiefly because those 2 starters, I think they're going to be pretty doggone good. And, my concern on defense is lies strictly on, not strictly, but specifically on the inside linebacker position, where we expect Monty Rice to replace Roquan Smith or attempt to. Several others will be given the crack there. Juwan Taylor, Tay Crowder, all those guys. And then, of course, Natrez Patrick. How and when is he going to be available will have a lot to do with what that position looks like. Carlos Cardoza is making a prediction here, 12-0 going into the SEC championship. And I wouldn't argue with you on that, Carlos. In fact, I'm getting ready to unveil my preseason prediction tomorrow as we head into the first day of actual practice, which is when I usually do that. And I could absolutely see Georgia going 12-0. The real question, and this goes back to the number 4 ranking in the preseason coaches poll, is say Georgia. So say everything happens that everybody thinks is going to happen. It would be first off, it'd be the first time in history that happened. But secondly, I would say that Georgia and Alabama would go undefeated through the regular season, both go to the SEC championship game and meet the SEC championship game. The question is, would the loser of that game still play in the playoffs? That was obviously the situation last year when the selection committee took 2 SEC teams, Alabama, which did not make the championship game, and Georgia, which won the championship. Say, if it happens like it's predicted, that would be Georgia losing the SEC championship game to Alabama. So then would a 12-1 Georgia team that just lost, and it would probably be ranked number 2 at that point, but just lost to Alabama in the SEC championship game, be taken in the college football playoff Final Four? I think it should, just based on, obviously I'm biased because I've covered the SEC for so long, but I absolutely think that the SEC is a little bit stronger than other teams from other conferences for the most part. But I've got, you got to see the whole year play out. You got to see what everybody looks like, and we got a long way to go before we get there. Right now, we're still trying to figure out what Georgia looks like, and we'll start to get a picture of that tomorrow as we enter into preseason practice. Georgia gets 28 practices. That's what the NCAA allows you. And as you know, they're starting here on August 2nd, so I doubt if Georgia will take advantage of all 28 of those practice opportunities. Usually they come in around 25, 26, because you got to give those guys some time off. So I would imagine that's what we'll see from Georgia. And so what do you think? You can go to DogNation.com and see a lot of stuff we've written about there. I wrote yesterday about the things that Georgia should be trying to figure out in preseason camp, and there's a bunch of them. Despite all the good things Georgia has going for it, they still have a lot to figure out heading into the preseason. And obviously everybody's going to talk about it. Everybody's going to be writing about the quarterbacks, Jake Fromm and Justin Fields. Here's the thing about that. We're not talking about it. So what you're going to see a lot is Jake Fromm versus Justin Fields. And I really don't see Georgia's quarterback situation like that at all. Obviously, one player or another has to start for Georgia. There's no question in my mind that that's going to be Jake Fromm, barring injury. And this is not that somebody's told me or anything. Kirby's going to spin it however he's going to spin it. But the fact of the matter is that kid started 15 games, technically started 14, and did basically everything you're asked to do as a quarterback as a freshman. You assume it's not a static situation, that he's going to continue to improve. That's a considerable head start on the true freshman, Justin Fields, who's coming in with all the talent in the world, all the athletic ability in the world. And Georgia will be doing everything they can to get him ready to play, and they will play. But I just don't see any scenario where, he beats out Jake Fromm in preseason camp. If he beats him out, it'll be because things weren't getting done in games during the season, or there's some kind of injury or something like that, such as Jake Fromm took over for Jacob Eason last year. I just think it's simple as that. So here's the thing, and you're probably going to hear a lot of this, I would imagine, coming out of camp. They're both trying to get each other ready. I would imagine that Jake Fromm spends as much time coaching up Justin Fields about the playbook and knowing plays and what he's seeing as James Coley, the quarterback coach, does, and Jim Chaney does. That's another scenario that I think is not small for Georgia heading into the season. There was a shake-up, for lack of a better word, on the offensive staff. And anytime something's going to be different, it follows that it probably won't be the same. So I would imagine that there'll be some effect of James Coley coaching quarterbacks rather than Jim Chaney. The bottom line is still going to be Jim Chaney's play script. He's still going to be calling plays from the press box, but James Coley's going to be with those guys and in their ear more than anybody else. He was a lot last year. If you go back and look, we spent a lot of time talking to him, that Jay Johnson did as well. The offensive analyst for Georgia. But that's got to have an effect. Conversely, Jim Chaney out there coaching the tight ends rather than Shane Beamer. Will that have an effect? Will it have an effect on the way Georgia calls plays and the targets for the tight end? Those guys joke that it might. I think there's something to that. I think they would definitely get targeted a couple more times just because it'll be in Jim Chaney's mind. But, they're going to start first and foremost with handing the ball to the tailback. I don't even know if you can call it a tailback anymore, the way Georgia's system is, but that's a whole other change there. It's not a small deal, the changing of the guard in the offensive backfield for Georgia. Georgia has recruited better than anybody in the country, bar none, at the tailback position, and that continues with DeAndre Swift and Samir White and James Cook, join Elijah Holyfield and Ron Herrion. There's plenty of guys there, but there's just no guarantee. More than 8,000 career yards between Chubb and Sony Michel. That is a big deal, guys. I mean, it's just no guarantee that these other guys can step in there and give them the same thing. Not to mention that you're going to have a little bit of an offensive line change. Now, I like Georgia's offensive line. I do believe that Georgia's offensive line can be better in 2018 based on the way Georgia's recruited at that position. I've got a story, a Towers Take at Dog Nation. Go click on. That the key to the turnaround under Kirby Smart was the transformation of the offensive line. I absolutely believe that. And I think step two of getting Georgia into regular national championship contention is to, have a similar effect on the defensive line. That hasn't been the case just yet. But I absolutely love what Georgia's doing on the offensive line, Sam Pittman and those guys, and you assume that they're not going to miss a hitch with Andrew Thomas moving over to left tackle and big Isaiah Wilson from the Bronx moving in at right. From Brooklyn, New York, at Bronx in the brain there. Isaiah Wilson, terrific kid, stepping in at the right tackle position, one of the biggest men I've ever seen. The right side of that line between Ben Cleveland and big Isaiah Wilson, that is the Great Wall of Athens over there. Those guys are huge. That doesn't necessarily mean they'll be better, but there's a chance that because of not just those guys, but all the guys that Georgia has recruited the offensive line, and those guys competing for positions, new guys like Jamari Sawyer, Trey Hill, and guys that just a year into this thing like Notori Johnson and Justin Schaefer, and then the veterans, like Kendall Baker and Lamont Gilliard. Georgia's got a lot to be proud of on that offensive line. Defensive line is going to be really interesting to figure out what that's going to look like. I got a story on Dog Nation. If you haven't seen it, I enjoyed writing it. Really enjoyed interviewing Jay Hayes' mother, Melissa Denise Hayes, who brought me up to speed. And I don't know if you knew, I didn't know before that I talked to her, that it's actually Jonathan Hayes. Jay Hayes came later. Jonathan is his name, Jonathan Lamar, and Jay Hayes came later in his life. And I think it's a big deal that Georgia was able to get him to transfer here out of Notre Dame. I guess I should shut up talking and answer some of your questions. Let's see here. Charlie Hall says Chubb loved the right side. There was a reason Georgia run that. I'm telling you, Andrew Thomas, too. If you go back and look at some of those tapes from last season of Sony Michel and Nick Chubb running the football on the right side of the line, Andrew Thomas was a big deal about that. And I don't know if that means they'll run more to the left or if, that's a product of being on the right side. A lot of times it's the strong side, but that's going to be interesting to see. Roe Hawkins is asking with the changes of the coach staff who will call the plays. I did mention that earlier, but obviously you didn't catch it. Jim Chaney is still going to call the plays. Actually looking forward to having an opportunity to interview Coach Chaney on Saturday, and Mel Tucker. We'll talk to those guys before the fan day on Saturday. Rich, let's see that. Let me see a show of. Give me some thumbs up or some commentary. Let me know if you're going to go to Fan Day on Saturday. It's been really interesting to see how that event is transformed under an event. I'm using air quotes on that one. Under Kirby Smart, he doesn't it ends up being, I think, 30 minutes, 45 minutes after practice that the fans get to queue up and get some autographs on the posters that are handed out to them. There's nothing like the old fan picture day, and I love to hear from, a lot of people look like they're going. Love to hear from you guys as to whether that's something you're interested in attending. But it'll be it's preceded by an open practice, and it's the unfortunate of that is, you're not going to be able to see all that much because you're still going to be in shorts and helmets, just being the second day of preseason practice or the 5-day acclimatization period. I looked it up. The NCAA has before you can get into full pads, and Georgia will not have realized that just yet. So they'll be running around in helmets, but it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, there's the question about Zamir White. I anticipate him going pretty high rate of speed. Shane Carney asking about him right here. I think Zamir White, just based on what I saw last spring, I don't know if you guys have seen some of the social media posts over the summer of Zamir working out in the indoor practice facility, the House of Pain, and he looks like he's ready to go. Now that doesn't mean I'm not 100% sure whether Georgia will want to cut him loose by the first game. I mean, you got to be really careful about a knee injury for a guy who depends so much on his knees like Zeus. But I would imagine he'll be, utilized. I mean, he'll play this season. The question is, how soon do they cut him loose? Because you don't have to. The fact of the matter is, you have 4 other perfectly healthy, capable backs, and Georgia doesn't have to spring Zeus loose, as they say, until they're absolutely certain that his knee is 100% and there's no chance of any kind of relapse injury. Charlie Hall wants to know who's replacing Lorenzo Carter. I mean, I don't think there's any question about that. That's going to be Walter Grant. Interesting how Georgia utilizes their outside linebackers. You had both Davin Bellamy and Lorenzo Carter. The next guy on the field tended to be DeAndre Walker. He came in a lot of pass rushing situations. So sometimes he would replace Bellamy, sometimes he would replace Lorenzo. I would imagine DeAndre's going to be on the field most of the time. It'll be interesting to see if any of these young guys end up coming in and replacing him when you're on passing downs. I doubt it. But Georgia has a lot of opportunity, a lot of options, at outside linebacker. And we'll see what they look like in the preseason. A lot of that is the kind of stuff that we're doing is trying to figure out rotations when we're out there watching practice. Georgia has so many options at the outside linebacker position, and so I'm sure they'll look at all of them during the spring. Robert Beal, Carlos Cardozo reminds me. Robert Beal's absolutely going to be in there. He's another one of those guys we haven't heard a whole lot about since he's been in camp. Obviously, he got off to a late start because of his situation, but he's definitely going to figure in the situation this spring. And James Crump wants to know, do I think DeAndre Walker will be improved against the run? Yeah, I think he will. I mean, he'll have to be. If you remember, that was something that hurt Lorenzo Carter early in his career, and Kirby Smart and certainly Dan Lanning, who's now the outside linebacker, because I'm not going to put him on the field if he said there's somebody can do what they need done better, and that was the case. Let's see, Adam Anderson. Desmond Thornton wants to know about Adam Anderson. We can name off all the guys that Georgia has brought in at outside linebacker. All of them are highly touted. Which ones will play? I don't know. Kevin Wood wants to know, is Gibbs going to play? I would say yes. He's been reinstated to the team. His cousin and the players said that he absolutely would when we talked to him at SEC football media days. Getting a notification on my phone, and I would imagine that would be the case. But, Kirby hasn't, given it his blessing per se, or, he's still got D'Angelo still has some things to work out in terms of earning his spot back on the team. But I would imagine, look, Georgia needs some help in the secondary, and D'Angelo Gibbs was helping them a good bit in that regard. For whatever happened last season happened. At the 8th game, he just disappeared, and did have some off-season surgery, but he disappeared before that. And hopefully we'll see Big D'Angelo Gibbs back in the fold this year. His cousin J.R. Reed would certainly love to have him back there with him. And good thing Georgia has J.R. Reed back there, because he's done a good job. We're about running out of time. I'm going to remind you again about Marco's Pizza. It is the pizza MVP with dough made fresh, an original sauce recipe, and 3 signature cheeses on every pizza. And they're not kidding when they tell you that. You can get 2 of them right now for $6.99 a piece. Call Marcos, order one today, or go to marcos.com, set up your profile on there. And when you get hungry, you can just go and click your favorite pizza, and it'll be there in no time. Really appreciate Marco's Pizza for sponsoring Tyler's Take here on Facebook Live. A couple more questions come on. James Crump wants to know, will Cleveland flip the left guard? I don't think so, James. He seems to have been pretty well entrenched at right guard. I think a more likely scenario would be Solomon Kinley emerging at that left tackle spot. But right now, somebody's got to beat out Kendall Baker, and he hasn't been beat out to this point. Kendall Baker's a rising senior, a little bit more slender than those guys. He's 6'6". And probably pretty good in pass protection. That's why he's continued to hold on to that position. So we'll see. Demetrius Smith says, don't sleep on David Marshall. To me, he's the best defensive lineman. I don't know about that. I would say that certainly Tyler Clark or Jonathan Ledbetter are the best offensive linemen. Defensive linemen, if you ask me, that Georgia has. But there's a lot to figure out over there. Nose guard's a position that we'll have to see what develops there, and I think that'll probably be Julian Robinson or some of the other Julian Rochester, or I'm trying to see possibly Devontae Wyatt, or I'm eager to see Jordan Davis, the kid coming out. I met him up in Charlotte earlier this year, and you'll read more about him on Dog Nation. And that kid reported in really good shape. He's been impressive in the weight room as well. But and then the addition of Jay Hayes, because please go on Dog Nation if you can and read that story I posted there about Jay Hayes, otherwise known as Jonathan Lamar Hayes, who's overcome so much to get from New York City to Notre Dame and to Georgia. Please read that, and I'd love for you to go on the bottom and give us your comments about it, and I'll go up and look them up and comment them on them there. Eric, we're going to wrap it up here, but Eric Belink wants to know if I see Cron in the Heisman picture this year. Absolutely. Georgia's pick number 4. If they get to the SEC championship game and possibly do the playoffs, it will be because of how well that kid played, and he will have deserved to be mentioned in the Heisman picture, as would possibly DeAndre Swift or whoever, Terry Godwin, whoever helped get Georgia there. Georgia's in that mix nowadays as a top 5 program, and anybody on their team. So we're going to have to wrap it up here. I'm out of town. Out of time. They're telling me. And the Sioux King says, bring the Granite Bulldog back. You go on DogNation.com, read the story I got up there about the Granite Dog, they call him, from Elberton, being moved back underneath the stands in the bridge. So a lot of people aren't happy about that. Go on line and let me read your comments about that. I promise I'll go read them and respond to them. So for Marco's Pizza, for Dog Nation, and for all the guys back in the studio, I'm Chip Towers. This is Towers Take on Facebook Live. Thanks for hanging out with me tonight and every Thursday night at this time. See y'all in the paper.